You know, I was talking to a friend the other day. He's about to make this big move for work, going overseas.
Oh, yeah.
And it kind of got me thinking,
Yeah.
how many of us have felt that pull, that what if about greener pastures, but like somewhere else? It's a question that hits home for a lot of us, I think, especially in Pakistan. When you think about the diaspora,
It's complicated.
It's complicated, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what this deep dive is all about, right? We're tackling this question that always seems to get people riled up.
Mm-hmm.
Are overseas Pakistanis like the heroes of the story or the villains?
Right.
Or is it somewhere in between?
It's always more complicated than that.
It's gotta be.
Yeah.
And we're not here to take sides, just to be clear.
Of course, yeah.
We're digging into what's actually going on.
Absolutely.
So by the end of this, you'll get the arguments, sure, but also the bigger picture, the why behind it all.
I think that's the most important part.
Totally. And one of the things you hear a lot, it's kind of the go-to accusation, is that overseas Pakistanis, they're a drain on the nation, right?
Yeah, you hear that a lot.
Especially when things get rough economically, whatever. There's this feeling of like...
Abandonment only.
Abandonment, yeah. Like you left us behind.
Right, and the remittances become this symbol.
Right, like that's the Band-Aid, but not the real fix.
Exactly.
And then there's the brain drain thing, which... I mean,
that's a whole other.
The idea that the best and brightest are like, see ya.
Yeah, leaving a void.
And taking Pakistan's potential with them.
Yeah, and it's interesting because what's often missing from these accusations is any sort of
nuance,
exactly. Historical context, economic reality. Like, let's just take remittances as an example.
Okay.
Back in the 70s, 80s, those inflows.
Yeah.
Absolutely crucial. Stabilize the entire economy at various points. We're not even just talking about helping families, though that was huge.
Yeah.
But this was a significant chunk of the national GDP.
Wow, I actually didn't realize it went back that far.
Oh, yeah. And at times, it even outstripped foreign direct investment. That's how vital it was.
That's wild. See, that's the kind of thing you don't hear. It's easy to simplify, be like, oh, just money being sent back.
Right.
But when you put it in that context, suddenly it's like, whoa, this has been a lifeline for a long time, not just like a recent thing.
Absolutely. And it reframes the whole conversation, doesn't it? You can't just dismiss it as people shirking responsibility when it's been so fundamental to how things have functioned.
Right, exactly. And the brain drain idea, that's got to be equally complex, right?
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah.
And look, it's true. When you've got skilled professionals leaving, it can create gaps, right? Certain sectors feel it more acutely.
Makes sense.
But it's never as simple as they left there for doom and gloom. You have to consider a lot of these folks who go abroad for education, for work even.
They come back.
They do. Maybe not everyone, but you'd be surprised. And they bring back this wealth of experience, a new way of looking at things. It's invaluable, really.
That's the brain circulation idea I've heard some people talk about.
Exactly that. It's a cycle, not a one-way street. Knowledge and expertise flowing back to benefit Pakistan in the long run.
Instead of just a drain, it's like an exchange almost.
And more like it, yeah. And it's not just theoretical. I mean, we've seen it happen time and time again. Pakistani professionals returning home, setting up businesses.
Oh, really? I'd be curious to hear some examples, actually.
Oh, there are tons. We've got people leading research initiatives, implementing international best practices in all sorts of fields. Their contributions way beyond just the financial. They're bringing back innovation, global networks, this drive to elevate Pakistan on the world stage. It's pretty remarkable when you think about it.
It does kind of change how you view the whole picture.
Exactly. It's about broadening our perspective.
It's easy to get caught up in the economics of it all, the money flowing back and forth. But we're talking about people, right? Like,
absolutely.
Like real, actual human beings making these huge life choices to pick up and leave everything, your family, your culture.
It's a huge decision.
Huge. To start over somewhere completely new. Like, what would even make someone do that?
You've hit on a really important point, which is that it's rarely like this simple turning your back on your home, right? It's more like a search for something that's missing.
To fill that gap.
Exactly. And often it's about trying to build a better life, not just for yourself, but for your kids, your family.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I think that's what the podcast did so well, highlighting these push factors.
The push factors, yeah.
The things that compel people to leave in the first place.
Because you got to understand that why before you can judge the what, right?
100%. You can't separate the choices people make from the circumstances that lead them there.
Totally. So, like, what are we talking about here? What are some of those big push factors?
Well, top of the list, and this is something I think most people can relate to, at least on some level, is the economic reality.
The lack of opportunity, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. Like, we all feel the pinch, right? When inflation is high, the job market's uncertain.
Tell me about it.
But imagine facing that times 10. It's a whole other level of how am I going to provide for my family?
It's like survival mode almost.
It is. And in Pakistani culture, that responsibility to your family, it's huge. It's everything.
So if you feel like you can't do that here,
you look elsewhere. Even if it breaks your heart to leave your loved ones behind, sometimes it feels like the only way.
Wow. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it like that.
It's about creating that better future.
Right. Right.
Even if it means making incredibly difficult choices in the present.
It's that long view.
Exactly.
But it's not always just about the money, is it?
No, definitely not. The podcast also talked about safety and security, and that really resonated with me.
That's a big one, and it's not something you hear talked about as much.
Right, because it's deeper than just, will I be physically safe?
It's about peace of mind, isn't it? Like, that feeling of stability you just can't get when...
And you're constantly worried.
Yeah. The podcast mentioned vulnerable groups being particularly at risk, and I thought, man, that's got to take a toll, just living with that constant fear.
Absolutely. It's about knowing your kids have a real shot at a future.
Right, and like, they're not going to get caught in something, you know?
It's heartbreaking to think about having to leave the place you love because you just want your children to be safe.
Because home doesn't feel safe anymore.
Exactly, and that's a choice no one should have to make. But it speaks volumes about the resilience of people.
The lengths they'll go to for their loved ones, it's pretty amazing.
It really is. And then, of course, there's the desire for a better education.
Yeah, better career opportunities.
Right, and we've all hit that wall at some point, right?
Oh, tell me about it.
Where you feel like, okay, this is as far as I can go with what's available here.
And you start to imagine what could be possible if
those limitations didn't exist.
Exactly.
And that's the thing. The podcast talked about entire avenues of advancement that they don't exist in Pakistan, not yet anyway.
It's about resources, right? Like having access to the same level of training, the technology.
Plus the infrastructure, the networks, it all plays a part.
So you can have all the talent in the world.
You can have the drive, the ambition.
But if the system itself is holding you back,
then what?
Exactly.
And that's why for some people, leaving isn't about getting rich. It's about pursuing those dreams.
The ones that might always be out of reach if they stayed put.
Exactly. But here's the thing, and we've touched on this before.
Go on.
That ambition, that drive to achieve, it can end up benefiting Pakistan in the long run.
That brain circulation idea again.
Exactly. It's not always a loss.
It's an exchange.
More like it, yeah. And I think that's crucial to remember because we can get so caught up in this narrative of they left, therefore we lost.
When it's so much more nuanced than that.
Way more nuanced. There's another side to this coin, and the podcast dug into that too, the contributions of the diaspora.
Yeah. Let's get into that because that's something I think gets overlooked a lot.
Absolutely. And it's a really important part of the story because these contributions, they're often huge and they take so many different forms.
Well, the obvious one, everyone talks about remittances.
Right. And for good reason.
The podcast mentioned billions of dollars flowing into Pakistan every single year.
And that's not just a drop in the bucket. We're talking about a lifeline for families.
Supporting entire households.
And on a macro level, it's a significant boost to the economy. In recent years, it's actually been one of the biggest sources of foreign exchange, bigger than foreign direct investment even.
Wow, I had no idea the scale was that big.
Oh, it's massive. Yeah. And I think it speaks to the connection, that even though people are physically distant, they still care deeply about their home, their families.
It's that commitment, right? Even across all those miles.
Exactly. And it's something to celebrate, I think, that bond that remains so strong.
Absolutely. But it's not just about the money, right? The podcast mentioned other ways the diaspora contributes.
Oh, tons of ways. Investing in local businesses, creating jobs.
Oh, that's huge.
It is, and it often gets overlooked. And then there's the philanthropy, the social initiatives, folks coming back to share their skills, their knowledge.
It's like they take that experience from living in different systems, different cultures.
And they bring back the best parts, the things they think could really make a difference back home.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it, how interconnected it all is.
It really is. And that's what I mean about needing that bigger picture, because it's so easy to get stuck in the negative.
They took everything and left narrative.
Exactly. But the reality, It's far more complex, far more interconnected.
It really makes you think about those connections, huh?
It really does.
How even being so far away, people still find ways to give back, to make things better.
There's that sense of responsibility.
Yeah.
No matter where you go, there's still that tie.
Absolutely. But the podcast, it went even further, almost like zooming out from just individual choices.
Right.
To this bigger question of what if it's not the leaving itself that's the problem, but the environment they feel like they have to leave behind.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
It feels kind of huge, honestly. Like, where do you even start with that?
Well, it's definitely complex, no doubt.
That's an understatement.
But the podcast, remember they use that phrase, hostile environment. Sounds kind of extreme.
Yeah, it did kind of jump out at me.
But when you really think about the challenges people are dealing with in Pakistan, it's like...
It's not that far off.
Exactly. And it made me wonder, what would it take to flip that?
To make staying not just like the default, but something people actually wanted to do.
Right. Because it shouldn't be about feeling trapped.
No, it should be a choice.
And the podcast pointed to some pretty big systemic issues. Things like corruption.
Right. Education, infrastructure, all that.
It's like, if you could wave a magic wand, fix just one of those things.
What would have the biggest impact, you think?
Man, that is the question, isn't it? $1 million question.
At least.
If I had to pick one, though, had to go all in on something.
Okay.
I think it's got to be governance, addressing the corruption.
Makes sense, because that's like the foundation, isn't it?
It is. Because when you have a system where people don't trust the government...
Or they feel like no matter what I do, the system's rigged.
It breeds cynicism, right?
Then
hopelessness.
It's hard to be optimistic.
Exactly. But when people have faith in the system...
When they believe that their hard work actually matters.
That their voices are heard.
It changes everything, doesn't it?
Everything. Suddenly, staying and contributing, it doesn't feel like a losing battle.
It's like that saying, right? People don't leave bad countries.
They leave bad governments.
Exactly. It's about more than just like building better schools or whatever.
It's about building a system people actually believe in.
Where they feel valued.
Exactly. And look, addressing corruption, it's not going to magically fix everything overnight.
Right. It's not that simple.
But it creates the conditions for all that other stuff to flourish. The education, the infrastructure.
It's about setting the stage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not just about individuals finding success. It's about a system where anyone who's willing to put in the work has a chance.
That's a powerful idea, that sense of collective hope.
That's what it's all about, isn't it?
Man, what a conversation. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
It's complex, that's for sure. But I feel like we've gone beyond just the easy answers.
It's more nuanced than just heroes and villains, that's for sure.
Way more. We've gotten into the individual stories, the challenges, the systems at play, like...
The whole picture.
Exactly. And hopefully, just talking about this, bringing it all out into the open...
Can lead to some real change, eventually.
Fingers crossed. But that's where you come in, dear listener, because this conversation... It doesn't end here.
We want to hear from you.
Have you been touched by this issue? Have you felt that pull to leave? Or maybe you've come back and you've got a whole perspective to share. Whatever it is, head to the comments. Let's keep this dialogue going.
Because the more we understand each other's experiences,
the closer we get to building that more hopeful future together. That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and we'll see you down the road.